You today. We've got YouTube going, and now YouTube's going, Facebook is going. We're all together. So, as y'all start coming in, that's great. Good to see you. If you're tuning in for the first time, my name is David, Pastor David. I am here with you from the First Church of God in Hubston, and we're gathering here online in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we're all separated. We're trying to get together and finding some ways creatively to be together. So we're glad to have all of you here. We've got some people logging in both with YouTube and Facebook. We're glad you're here. I'm going to go ahead and go forward with some announcements at our children's time, and then we'll actually get into the message a little bit later. As our informality comes, last week, apparently from Melissa, we had Pajama Day. This week, she announced, I found out on Facebook, that today is Bring Your Dog to Church Day. So do you have some dogs that are with you? If you do, please keep them away from the cats that may also be here. We don't want them to be getting into a tussle. That would probably not be a good thing. So if you can keep your dog contained, that would be helpful. Cats contained too. They're usually off on their own thing, and they don't want to pay attention to anybody anyway. So that's fine. So we don't want any dog and cat fights that are distracting. We do have daily devotions that are going on from Monday through Saturday at 6 p.m. Pastor Dan's going to be doing the one tomorrow night, and Pastor Carlos is the one that did the one last night. As we continue doing that, you can feel free to log in and talk. I see Melissa saying the monkey is with her. Monkey, keep that dog off everybody else's calves. No biting today. So as we move forward, you can feel free to log in with us. It's the same place that we are here with Facebook and YouTube. You can log in and you can interact with us. You can say hi. You can talk. We can share together. So we would invite you to that as well. I had mentioned this last week, and it said that I was going to try to work on getting a trivia thing together. And I'm going to try to have that together by the end of this week. If you didn't mark last week and you were interested in participating in trivia, just mark that down in the comments. I'll go back through and I'll note that, and I'll make sure that I have your contact information, and I will. You can message that to me or whatever. My email address is david@hubstonchurch.org. If you didn't do that before, you don't want to put your email address or something like that out here, I certainly understand that. I just hit the computer. But we're going to try to do that toward the end of this week. Maybe Friday, Saturday. I'm still working out some of those details, make sure I've got everything together. I'm collecting some of the trivia questions and several rounds that we're going to go. So, but you would be invited to that. Guys, next week is Mother's Day. I'm not going to ask you for that response. I'm going to tell you that response so that you are aware of that, because you don't want to miss Mother's Day. Although we are sheltering in place, although there's still not a lot of active stuff going on, we want to make sure that you don't miss that. So maybe some creative things you can do with your kids to try to make your significant other feel special, your wife or your mother if you are not married. That's okay too, but you don't want to miss that. So I do see that Rachel's saying she's got a dog and a cat with us, so I'm sure that you have already got that arranged. So good job, Rachel. And finally, with the final announcement is the offerings. We've had several people mailing in their offerings to try to save from online fees. There's not a lot of online fees. It's less than 3%, but there's a little bit. If you want to give online, if that's easier for you, certainly would welcome you to do that. Or you can mail your check to the church to 1004 East Orange Street, Hubston 60942, and you can get that to us that way. Or if you don't have a stamp, you can't get to the post office, you can let us know. We've gone around and picked some things up too when somebody said we need to do that. I had somebody drop by the house yesterday and drop their check in an envelope off for me to be able to turn in as well. And we don't look at those. That's passed on to Leanne. She counts it up and gets that. So that's all private. We don't even pay attention to what that is. Just want to give that opportunity to you. Okay. Well, let me talk to the kiddos for a minute. Girls, I did put a couple sheets of paper out for you as well. Okay, it's on the table. Johanna and Emma. As we get together while we talk today, I want you to draw out your favorite part of church. It may be children's church, it may be Awana, it may be VBS. I would like to know what you like best. So what you enjoyed. And so when you finish drawing, you can draw it, you can color it, you can just draw it and not color it, but kind of write out what it is, or have your parents write out what it is, and then have them take a picture and post it, because I would really like to see what your favorite parts are. And then you can actually have your parents, if you answer that out loud, you can have your parents post that on the Facebook comments page here, and let us know some of the things that you think are really special, that you think are really important. I know there's a little bit of lag time between what I'm saying and what y'all are hearing, and so by the time you answer, there's a little bit of a lag there, but we're going to see how that works. Okay, so here's the question: why do we go to church? Why do we go to church? What do you think, kids? I heard a groan. Maybe it's because your parents forced you to go to church. I don't know. Um, Perhaps it's you said because we have fun, and I think although that's not the purpose, I'm really glad that you have fun at church. Um, what do you think? My girls that are here, what do you think? Why do we go to church?
Worship God.
To worship God. That's a good reason. Anybody else? It could be to learn about God or Jesus. It could be to learn about ourselves and what we need to do in response to God. It's to be with other believers, to encourage them, to encourage ourselves, to help us along the way. And we all miss being with people, don't we? We really do. Pastor David does too. We go because God calls us to obedience, and He tells us that we need to go and we need to gather together. And that's why we're trying to gather together here, even though we can't be in the building itself. And of course, as somebody here said, we come to worship. And I hope that you had the opportunity to sing and worship today. Miss Melissa put a playlist out. Wes, I'm really glad you go to church. That's a really good thing too. We're glad that you like to go to church, whether you know the reason or not. You know you feel safe there, and that's happy. I'm glad about that. Um, Church can be fun. Church can be together, where we're drawing together, we're loving each other, and we're loving God together. And there's something we miss about not being together. And yet, even though that's the case, we can join together. And I see many of you have said hi back and forth, and that's great. You can keep on saying hi, and interact together. It's good for us to be able to draw together. Denise, it's good to see you here today. I'm glad you're here. I am looking forward to all of us being able to be together in person. Um, it may be when we're working together, we can join together in heart, join together in mind, and worship together. And kids, as Pastor David is getting a little confused, I'm sorry about that. As we work together, we post those pictures of what you got later, because I wanted to go back and look for them. It may be if parents and kids are watching us after we've already done the live post, you still do that. I will still go back later this afternoon or early evening and look through those. So I would love to see those responses from you. Okay, let me talk to your parents for a little bit and have my time with them. Dad jokes. So I understand that timing is everything. And last week, as I told the dad joke, I waited for the punchline and it froze up, and you didn't get the punchline. And so I had to go back later and give you the punchline. There were some of you that were really, really upset, not angry upset, but you were really worried because you didn't know what the punchline was. So you know what that tells me? That tells me you like the dad jokes. Even if you groan, you really want to know what happens. So I know how much you miss those jokes. So I'm going to share a little bit with you this morning. You've probably heard some of these before. What do you call, and if this offends you, I'm sorry. It's part of my humor. So here we go. And Mary's saying, oh no, what does he got to do? What do you call a guy with no arms and no legs in a hole? Phil. What do you call, you got it? Okay, what do you call a guy with no arms and no legs on a wall?
Art.
Art. My family's heard this before. What do you call a guy with no arms and no legs on a floor? Matt. And what do you call a guy with no arms and no legs out in the ocean? Bob. Okay. All right. So that's the background for this. And so you're saying, oh my, oh my. So what do you call a guy with no body and no nose? Nobody knows. All right. So there you go. That's your dad joke for today. We will move right along. And apparently my son has heard that one before too. So tough crowd. All right. Moving right along. Today I'm going to be talking about purpose. Um, Here's a thought to ponder. It may have a little bit of humor to it. I was having some yard work done yesterday. I was doing it. I had the slave driver behind me with a whip. I'm making sure that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, and I'm aching a little bit today. Um, and so I had this thought that if God wanted me to be able to touch my toes this morning, He would have put them on my knees so I could. Yeah. Okay. So purpose. Why is the church here? And the focus of today's sermon, the sermon title is Purpose Now. What is my purpose now? What's the purpose in the middle of all this? What is God calling me to do? What is God calling us to do? What is He calling His church as a whole to do? We've covered some of those things in kids' time of what He calls us to do and us gathering together. The New Testament offers us several things that we're supposed to do to each other, with each other, for each other. And I've done some sermons on that. We've talked about this some in the past as well. We're supposed to unite with one another. We're supposed to be one. We're supposed to build each other up. We're supposed to encourage each other, teach each other, instruct each other. We're supposed to serve one another in love. We're supposed to be humble and honor each other. We're supposed to forgive one another. And that means we've got opportunities for us to grow inwardly. I've got to grow to be able to forgive others. And it gives us opportunity to learn to grow in grace as we treat other people with love as well. And of course, we're told several times to love one another. There are really three main theological points behind this question of what is our purpose. The first one is this, and it comes from John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35. Jesus is saying this. He says, "A new commandment I give to you, love one another as I have loved you. So you should, as I have loved you, so you should love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another." The great commandment is what we would call that. And that is the first point. The main theological point of this is love. We're supposed to love. God calls us to love. That's a part of our relationship. Love God, love people. 1 John chapter 4 says, we love because He first loved us. We love. He passed that along down. So it's one of our purposes for being the church is to love. Love our community, love our neighbors, love our church, love our world. And you could break that down and make that a whole other sermon or sermon series as well. The second theological point, theological purpose for us gathering together is the Great Commission. And that's actually breaks up into two different parts on this one. The Great Commission is where Jesus speaks to His disciples at the end after He's already resurrected. He's getting ready to ascend to heaven. And He speaks to them. And He says, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you, and I am with you always, even to the end of the age." And He says that we need to make disciples. Now, we've talked about making disciples in a lot of different times, and I'm gonna go with our pattern here in a minute. But this making disciples comes really into 2 points. The main verb, and that's in this passage in Matthew chapter 28, is make disciples. But we make disciples by going. We make disciples by baptizing. We make disciples by teaching. Those are supports for that verb. And so as we make disciples, we are helping people to grow. And that's the first part of this. So helping people to grow spiritually in their relationship with God. That is after we are already saved, we are supposed to be growing with Him. Just because you have an experience with God, salvation experience where you have a relationship with Him, just because you had that 35 years ago, doesn't mean that is supposed to be all there is. We are called to grow. And I think if you talk to any church, any pastor, any person that has read the Word, any believer that's been involved with Christ for a long time, they will help you realize that yes, you are supposed to grow. It's just not enough to say a prayer. It's a growth process. We're supposed to walk in relationship with Him. Now, the third point here also comes from the Great Commission, which is to offer Christ to people outside our walls, to be able to interact. We would sometimes call that evangelism. So we grow ourselves, but we also offer Christ to others, and that's another way that we make disciples. Now, all three of these, loving, growing, and evangelizing, those are all important. And as we look at that, a lot of churches focus on one of these or two of these. Rarely do you see them really focusing all three. That they may have the ideal that that's what we're supposed to do, but they don't always focus on all three. And you find different emphases. And actually, as time goes on, you will see that certain pastors seem to focus on one or two of those, and the church will emphasize those things while that pastor is there, and that pastor moves on, and different things start coming to the focus and being raised up. But all three of those things are important. So that's why the church is here. That's why God gave us the church, is to love, is to make disciples by growing, and make disciples by evangelizing, by sharing Christ. So if that's why the church is here, why is the First Church of God of Hoopeston, Illinois here? What is our purpose? And when I first started coming here, well, before I came here, as I was praying, and I already accepted that I was going to come here, and I was praying about what God would have me lead and do here. I've shared with you that the personal discipleship plan comes in 3 steps. I've shared this many times, and I'm going to share this again. The first step is in knowing Jesus. And each of these steps is a growth process. And for those that are just tuning in, and haven't been with us very long, I'm going to explain this just a little bit. Knowing Jesus is not again like a prayer. It's a step-by-step process. I continue to know him. I have known him. I do know him, and I will continue to know him. It is a growth process, and knowing Jesus is part of what my life and your life is about. The second step of that personal discipleship is loving Jesus, my expression of love to him. And by extension, because I love him, the Bible tells us that we cannot love God whom we can't see if we can't love our fellow man who we can see. So part of loving Jesus is loving people. And so knowing Jesus and continuing to know him, and then loving him and continuing to fall more in love with him as we grow. And then third, living Jesus, giving my life as a gift to him, living a living sacrifice, given an honor and love to him. I live that life out of surrender to him. And as I live that life out of surrender to him, he guides me as I make each choice. And that discipleship, knowing Jesus, loving Jesus, and living Jesus, is the prescription for that growth, for our relationship with God. Now, I believe that prescription is still our task for today, but it can be done different ways. And as we are sheltering, it's kind of hard to live Jesus when you're staying in your house all by yourself. When you're not interacting with people, when you're not out among other people, it's harder to do that. It's harder to love people for him. It's hard to live him, but there are ways that we can do that. So I would ask you this today, looking back over your last week, what are some things that you have done this week to know Jesus more? What are some things that you've done this week to know Jesus more? What are some things that you've done this week to love Jesus more? And then have you sought him to see, God, what is it that you want me to do to live you out, to have Jesus living through me? What is it that I can do? And really, as we've talked about seeking out some things from God, to take time to be quiet and sit before him and say, God, what is it that you'd like me to do right now, today, in this day and time, to be able to interact more the way you want me to? How do I need to do that? I want to read for you a piece from Max Lucado. Max Lucado wrote a piece on Jesus, about Jesus' purpose. It's analyzing thoughts and feelings as Jesus might have had. It's called Out of the Carpentry Shop. And I'm actually going to just read that to you. I've read through it several times, and hopefully you'll be able to get the content from it. But I'm going to read that to you so that you can kind of hear. And these are Max Lucado's words. The heavy door creaked on its hinges as he pushed it open. With a few strides, he crossed the silent shop and opened the wooden shutters to a square shaft of sunshine that pierced the darkness, painting a box of daylight on the dirt floor. He looked around the carpentry shop. He stood for a moment in the refuge of the little room that housed so many sweet memories. He balanced the hammer in his hand. He ran his fingers across the sharp teeth of the saw. He stroked the warm wood of the sawhorse. He had come to say goodbye. It was time for him to leave. He had heard something that made him know it was time to go, so he came one last time to smell the sawdust and lumber. Life was peaceful here. Life was so safe. Here, he had spent countless hours of contentment. On this dirt floor, he had played as a toddler while his father worked. Here, Joseph had taught him how to hammer a chair. I wonder that he thought as he took one last look around the room. Perhaps he stood for a moment at the workbench, looking at all the tiny shadows cast by the chisel and shavings. Perhaps he listened as voices from the past filled the air. Good job, Jesus. Joseph, Jesus, come and eat. Don't worry, sir. We'll get it finished on time. I'll just get Jesus to help me. I wonder if he hesitated. I wonder if his heart was torn. I wonder if he rolled a nail between his fingers and his thumb, anticipating the pain that would come. It was in the carpentry shop that he must have given birth to his thoughts. Here, concepts and convictions were woven together to form the fabric of his ministry. You can almost see the tools of his trade in his words as he spoke. You can hear the trueness of a plumb line as he called for moral standards. You can hear the whistle of the plane as he pleads for religion to shave away unnecessary traditions. You can picture the snugness of a dovetail as he demands loyalty in relationships. You can imagine him with a pencil and ledger as he urges honesty. It was here that his human hands shaped the wood that his divine hands had created. And it was here that his body matured while his spirit waited for the right moment, the right day. And now that day had arrived. It must have been difficult to leave. After all, life as a carpenter hadn't been that bad. It wasn't bad at all. Business was good. The future was bright. His work was enjoyable. In Nazareth, he was known only as Jesus, the son of Joseph. You can be sure he was respected in the community. He was good with his hands. He had many friends. His favorite among the children. He could tell a joke. He could tell a joke and had a habit of filling the air with contagious laughter. I wonder if he started to say, I could do a good job here in Nazareth. Settle down, raise a family, be a civic leader. I wonder because I know he had already read the last chapter. He knew that the feet that step out of the safe shadow of the carpentry shop would not rest until they had been pierced and placed on a Roman cross. You see, he didn't have to go. He had a choice. He could have stayed. He could have kept his mouth shut. He could have ignored the call or at least postponed it. And had he chosen to stay, who would have known? Who would have blamed him? Who could come back as a man? He could have come back as a man in another era when society was not so volatile, when religion wasn't so stale, when people would listen better. He could have come back when crosses were out of style. But his heart wouldn't let him. If there was hesitation on the part of humanity, it was overcome by the compassion of his divinity. His divinity heard the voices. His divinity heard the hopeless cries of the poor, the bitter accusations of the abandoned, the dangling despair of those who were trying to save themselves. And his divinity saw the faces, some wrinkled, some weeping, some hidden behind veils, some obscured with fear, some earnest with searching, some blank with boredom. the face of Adam to the face of the infant born somewhere in the world as we are talking this together, where he says, is reading these words. He, Jesus, saw them all. And you can be sure of one thing. Among the voices that found their way into the carpenter shop in Nazareth was your voice. Your silent prayers, uttered on tear-stained pillows, were heard before they were said. Your deepest questions about death and eternity were answered before they were asked. And your direst need, your need for a Savior, was met before you ever sinned. Not only did he hear you, he saw you. He saw your face aglow the hour you first knew him. He saw your face in shame the time you first fell. The same face that looked back at you from this morning's mirror and looked at him, and it was enough to kill him. He left because of you. He laid his security down with a hammer. He hung the tranquility on the peg along with his nail apron. He closed the window shutters and on the sunshine of his youth and locked the door on the comfort and the ease of anonymity. Since he could bear your sins more easily than he could bear the thought of your hopelessness, he chose to leave. It wasn't easy. Leaving the carpentry shop never has been. My question for you, folks, and that's the end of the reading, but my question for you is this. What is your carpenter shop that God may be calling you to leave the safety of in order for him to accomplish his purpose in your life? That's a long question. Let me say it again. What is your carpenter shop that God may be calling you to leave the safety of in order to accomplish his purpose in your life? Hopefully, in this time of sheltering, you've taken some extra time to think, to pray, to consider. Many of you are having slowing schedules where you're not as active, you're not as busy, you're home a little bit more. And because there's less to do, you may take time to be able to listen a little bit better. Others have had things multiplied and busier schedules. And either way, if our schedules are busier or if they are lighter, whichever it is, we still need to take time to listen to the Lord. And sometimes he calls us to leave that which is familiar, the way we've always done it. And that can be startling. When the elders met on March the 15th, after that Sunday morning service, that was our last time that we gathered together at the church building. And we agreed that we were not going to meet in person for services, but had suggested instead that we have daily devotions, a real short snippet. And actually the suggestion was we have a 5-minute or so daily devotion each day, including Sunday. And I felt like we needed to have more time together. And so we're doing a Sunday thing that's closer to normal, and then a 5-minute thing each night to 8 minutes, because I'm long-winded. When they first talked about that idea, the idea was suggested that I do this live. And of course, I had done some recording before as I had talked, as we've done the Old Testament walk, which is still on our Facebook page or still on our YouTube page that's connected. But you can go back and look at that. And I think there was some quality stuff there. But as I did those recordings, it took time. And even though it only took about 2 to 2.5 minutes, I would record sometimes. I'd record a week at a time, but it would sometimes take us 2.5, 3, 4 hours to record all that plus the editing time. And it just took a lot of time. And the elders came to me and said, we really think that you ought to do this live. And when they said that, you have to understand that a shaft of fear went through me, because I am by nature an introvert. I get up in front of people, I talk, and that's fine. But I always try to come very prepared and knowing what I'm going to say and speaking clearly, so I know I haven't said the wrong thing or I haven't stumbled my words, and I've thought through all those words ahead of time. And I want to make sure that I do that. And to do it live means if I stumble, like I did earlier today, that people might make fun of me. They might laugh at me, or they might take that clip, because once it goes out on the internet, it's there. And what are people going to say? What are people going to do? And I had a lot of fear. What if these things happened. And this thought that I had of speaking live on Sunday when you're present versus speaking live on the internet was far different. It was a huge difference for me. Speaking the difference of telling a joke when I can see people, oh, or laughing or chuckling or just shaking their head is different than telling a joke here where I don't see the reaction, where I don't know what's going on. I can imagine with some of my dad jokes how those responses go, but I don't know. And my hope always when we were together and when we're together here is for any message that I have to be planned and considered and clear. And if I were to record, I could just take multiple takes if I needed, just like I did with the Old Testament walk. I could take multiple takes and I could do it that way. But let me say, as I've discovered, I knew this before, but I've rediscovered, I'm cut out to be a pastor, not a televangelist. And I can remember preparing for my first live episode. When I was trying to do the test to make sure we could do Facebook and YouTube live together, and I could work one with my computer for YouTube and one with my phone, so that I could work it all together. And I could remember standing in the office and looking out the window, and Melissa was sitting over her desk over here, and I was looking out the window, and I was feeling overwhelming fear. I was just speaking a quick devotional thought, and it was on fear related to COVID-19. I wasn't that fear that was consuming me, though. I was feeling fear about speaking live. And I can remember almost tears coming down my cheeks. They weren't coming down, but they were welling up within me. And I remember saying aloud, it's ridiculous for me to feel so much fear about this little thing. I can trust God to lead me. He's led me here and he will lead me on. And I prayed a prayer audibly and said, God, I need your help. And Tish, I appreciate you saying thank you for stepping out of my box. It was a challenge. It was a challenge for Jesus to leave the carpentry shop, I'm sure, even though he knew the greatest purposes. God leads us. And sometimes he leads us to different things for his good purpose, things that make us uncomfortable. And I think there are some people here today that God is calling to do something new. And you have been afraid to respond. And I would say, go to him in prayer, make sure you're hearing what he's saying, but step out in faith. Do you remember the passage in Matthew chapter 14? It takes place right after Jesus fed the 5,000, right after he heard that John the Baptist had been killed, the one person that really knew who he was. And he's got the crowd that's here. He's fed the 5,000 men plus women and children, and he sends the disciples on the boat to cross the lake, and as he dismisses the people. And then he goes on to the mountains to pray. He takes time to pray, and then late at night he begins walking across the lake, walking on water. And when his disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified, and they said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. And Jesus immediately said, "Take courage. It's me. It's all right. Don't be afraid." And that's where Peter said, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come out there with you." And in my language, Jesus said, "Well, come on out here then. Come on out." And Peter got out of the boat. He walked in the water and came toward Jesus. But then he started looking around. He started seeing the wind and the effects of the wind and feeling it in his face. He'd lived on that lake and the fisher, and he looks down and realizes, I don't have a net under me. I don't have anything under me. I've just got the water lapping underneath my feet. This water that my net goes straight through. And he begins to feel fear, and he starts to sink. And he says, "Lord, save me." And Jesus reached out his hand and caught him and said, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" Now, see, I commend Peter for getting out of the boat. because all the other 11 stayed in the boat. They stayed where it was safe. Peter stepped out. But folks, he got out there where he didn't feel safe. Was he safe? Yeah. Because the safest place to be in all things, the safest place to be is close to the Lord, accomplishing his purpose. Even when that purpose seems uncertain and you don't see what the future holds. Even when in following him, bad things happen. And that does happen. We aren't promised a rosy life just because we follow the Lord. When bad things happen, we can continue to trust him, continue to follow him, and he will be with us. I think of C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote a lot of theology. He came to Christ later in his life, and one of the things, one of his books, or some of his books that I like the best, are the Chronicles of Narnia. Chronicles of Narnia are theology books for children. Basically, it's written in a narrative format, so it's a story. But as you tell the story, people are able to see and follow and know more about what different parts of Christian life is about. And in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, the 4 children that came from our world into the world of Narnia, they go and they find out that Aslan, who is the king of everywhere, is a lion. And they're thinking, okay, he's the big dude here, but he's a lion. Is he safe? And Mr. Beaver says, is he safe? Didn't you just hear what I said? He's a lion. Of course he's not safe, but he's good. And I would say, you know what? Because of God's goodness, we're safe. It feels risky. It feels unsafe. And we feel fear when we follow sometimes. But even though we may feel that, we're safe in his hands. Brothers and sisters, we're the church. We're called to be the church, to love, to make disciples by evangelizing, to make disciples by growing ourselves and growing inwardly and helping others to grow. We're called to those things. And we're called to, as a church here locally, to know Jesus, love Jesus, and live Jesus. But there's a greater calling individually for you. It's not just to be part of the whole. The whole of the church grows because the individual parts of the church grow. What are you doing in your relationship to know Jesus more, to love Jesus more, to live Jesus more? And what are you doing to listen to him as he speaks to you about what you need to do as you follow him? And get out of the boat. Let me pray with you. Heavenly Father, thank you so much that you risked it all, not just to leave the carpentry shop, but to leave heaven. Leave the glory of heaven where everything was peace, everything was right, everything was good, and you left to come into this broken world. And you did it for us. And you did it again, as Max Lucado so eloquently put it. You left again for us and left the safety of your disciples to be by yourself praying in Gethsemane and to the cross and to the tomb. But you rose again. And you did that for us that we might have victory over the sin in our lives, but to also have purpose, that we can join with you in partnership. And I ask that you will help reveal to us, even on this day of May 3rd, 2020, that you will help us to be able to understand your call, that we will respond to you, and that we will get out of the boat and fulfill the purpose that you had for us in this generation on this day. Thank you for calling us here together. I believe every person that was here as we were sharing and as you were ministering to hearts, even in their own homes, it was not an accident. And I ask that you would draw them toward you for a deeper, more meaningful walk. In Jesus' name. Folks, we're glad that you were here. We'll be continuing on our normal pattern, our nightly devotions. Pastor Dan's doing tomorrow night, and he'll be doing that live Facebook and YouTube and that going on. We're glad you were here today. God bless you, and we'll see you again. Bye-bye.